Hello students, in this session we are continuing with the part 2 of the topic skeletal muscle relaxants. So in this session, we shall be learning the remaining part of the neuromuscular blockers. So we had already discussed quite a bit about the neuromuscular blockers in the part 1. So we'll be discussing the remaining part of the pharmacology of the selected neuromuscular blockers. We shall be looking into the adverse effects of neuromuscular blockers and finally the uses of neuromuscular blockers. Then we shall be learning the pharmacology of the directly acting skeletal muscle relaxant, that is dantrolene sodium. And finally, we shall be winding up the session with the pharmacology of centrally acting skeletal muscle relaxant. So we shall now look at the individual compounds coming under the neuromuscular blockers. So first one to be used, as I already told you in the part 1, is D-tubocurarine, which is a non-depolarizing neuromuscular blocker. And nowadays it is not at all popular because of its adverse effects. That is the adverse cardiovascular effects as well as its tendency to cause a release of histamine and its prolonged action. Because of all these adverse effects or unwanted effects, it is not popularly used now. The next one that we are going to discuss is succinylcholine, and this, as you already know, is a depolarizing neuromuscular blocker. And I told you in the previous session that this acts for a very short duration of time. So it is mainly used for short procedures like passing a tracheal tube. For that, it can be used and to provide the muscle relaxation during passing of the tracheal tube. And it starts its action within 1 to 1.5 minutes. And the action is very short, and the spontaneous recovery occurs in 5 minutes. And but the problem with succinylcholine use is that it can cause muscle soreness. This can also cause unwanted changes in the blood pressure and the heart rate. In some individuals, it can lead to arrhythmias. It is also associated with histamine release, just like dictubocurarine and hyperkalemia. So you can note down the adverse effects of succinylcholine, that is muscle soreness, changes in the BP and the heart rate, arrhythmias, histamine release, and hyperkalemia. Again, because of these adverse effects, we do not prefer too much of succinylcholine use also. Then comes the pancuronium, doxycurium, and vecuronium. So pancuronium and doxycurium, they are all long-acting neuromuscular, non-depolarizing neuromuscular blocker. They are much safer than D-tubocurarine. As I already told you in the previous session that the newer ones are having less or minimal cardiovascular effects, as well as they are not associated with much of histamine release also. Doxycurium has got the longest duration of action and is therefore it is used for mainly for long duration surgeries. Now, vecuronium is one of the most commonly used skeletal muscle relaxant. It has got a short duration of action, and you will come across the use of vecuronium like very rampantly in the current setup. In Atracurium and Cis-Atracurium, they are less potent than Pancuronium and they are also shorter acting. It has got very peculiar elimination that is called as the Hoffman elimination. Now, what does happen? What happens in Hoffman's elimination? Here, the drug is inactivated in the plasma by spontaneous non-enzymatic degradation. That means there is no enzyme that is involved in the metabolism of atracurium. There is just a rearrangement of the molecules in the drug, and that causes its inactivation, and this inactivation occurs in the plasma. This is called as the Hoffman elimination. So its duration of action is not altered in patients with hepatic or renal insufficiency. So already you know that the enzymes that are involved, the metabolism often occurs in the liver and the excretion occurs by kidney. Now, because this drug is inactivated without the use of enzymes, there is not much change, or its metabolism is not at all affected in persons who are having hepatic or renal insufficiency. So already you know that if a drug is metabolized by the liver and in a patient who is having liver disease, in that patient, the metabolism of the drug will be compromised because the enzymes will be affected in that particular patient because the liver is not adequately functioning. But this drug is not using any enzymes for its inactivation, and hence its metabolism or its inactivation is not affected by the liver disease or the kidney disease. So its duration of action remains unaltered even in patients who are not having proper functioning liver or kidney. Then rocuronium, it has got a rapid onset and intermediate duration of action. It is also used as an alternative to succinylcholine for tracheal intubation. So I already mentioned the adverse effects of succinylcholine in the previous slide. All these adverse effects are not there in this rocuronium. Rocuronium is a non-depolarizing intermediate acting neuromuscular blocker. So it is now used as an alternative. Instead of using succinylcholine, we can prefer to use rocuronium for the purpose of relaxing the muscles for tracheal intubation. Then it does not require reversal. Reversal means the reversal of the blockade, which I already mentioned in the previous slide. You do not require an agent like anticholinesterase to reverse its action. Why? Because it gets spontaneously, the effect will be reversing after some time. But it is acting only for a short duration of time. So its action will spontaneously reverse after some time. So you don't require the agency of anticholinesterase to reverse its action. Then mivacurium. Mivacurium is the shortest acting non-depolarizing competitive blocker, neuromuscular blocker. It also doesn't require reversal. So among the non-depolarizing neuromuscular blocker, the shortest acting is mivacurium. But if you look at the neuromuscular blockers as a whole, that is both non-depolarizing neuromuscular blockers and depolarizing neuromuscular blockers, then the shortest acting will be succinylcholine, that is which is a depolarizing blocker. Among the non-depolarizing blocker, mivacurium is the shortest. But if you look at the neuromuscular blockers as a whole, then the depolarizing neuromuscular blocker, succinylcholine, is the shortest acting. So I hope that is clear to all of you. Now let us look at some of the adverse effects of neuromuscular blockers. So we are dealing with both the depolarizing as well as the non-depolarizing neuromuscular blockers here. So if there is a paralysis that is occurring for a long time, it can lead to the diaphragmatic paralysis and prolonged apnea. This which you have seen already with the case of succinylcholine. Then flushing, precipitation of asthma. Why does this occur? This is occurring mainly because of the histamine release, which is often seen with D-tubercularium, atracurium, and even succinylcholine can cause, because all of it is associated with the release of histamine. Then fall in the BP and cardiovascular collapse with the D-tubercularium. And this effect, this adverse effect is less with the newer SMRs. Then I had already told you the cardiac arrhythmias, cardiac arrest, dangerous hyperkalemia, muscle soreness, myalgia can be seen with succinylcholine. And this is malignant hyperthermia. Malignant hyperthermia can also occur with succinylcholine. Malignant hyperthermia. So malignant hyperthermia we are not discussing in under this session. We will be discussing in detail under the topic on general anesthetic, but I'll just give you a brief idea about malignant hyperthermia. It is a condition which is characterized by high body temperatures, and it is so high that the muscles start and the temperature is mainly because the muscles now become very much contracted, and because of that a lot of heat is being produced, and this is often occurring because of the abnormal ryanodin receptor calcium channels. Okay, and because the individuals who are having this abnormal ryanodin receptor calcium channels develop this malignant hyperthermia, and the pathology behind this is that there is a rapid contraction of the muscles, and because of the heat, that heat is produced. A lot of calcium enters the muscles to the abnormal ryanodin receptor channels, and because of that the muscle contracts and a lot of heat is produced. And this can be seen with the some drugs like succinylcholine, and also seen with another general anesthetic called as halothane. So about the malignant hypothermia, you will be learning in detail in under general anesthesia. I've just briefed out it for your understanding here also. Now, indications for the use of neuromuscular blockers. So, at the beginning of the chapter, I had told you that these are all used as an adjuvant to general anesthesia to produce adequate skeletal muscle relaxation during the surgery. So, usually, pecuronium and rocuronium, they are the most frequently used competitive or non-depolarizing neuromuscular blockers. Succinylcholine is used for brief procedures like endotracheal intubation, for laryngoscopy, bronchoscopy, esophagoscopy, fracture reduction. These are all procedures which require very little time. So for that, you can use a short-acting depolarizing neuromuscular blocker like succinylcholine, or an alternative from the non-depolarizing blockers also, which I mentioned already, rocuronium. These can be again used as an alternative for succinylcholine for such short procedures. Then, in case of assisted ventilation of critically ill patients in ICU. So, we have been talking about a lot of ventilator support these days. So, whenever a patient is on ventilator, you have to paralyze his normal ventilation. And now the ventilation is occurring with the help of the machine. So, the normal ventilation is you have to handicap. So, or you have to paralyze that. And for that, we use the skeletal muscle relaxant like vecuronium, which will paralyze the normal ventilation of the person, so that the machine can take up the function of ventilation for the patient. Then in the case of convulsions and trauma from electroconvulsive therapy. So what is electroconvulsive therapy? The shock treatment. You all would have heard about the shock treatment that is given in case of depression, patients with depression and suicidal tendencies. Electroconvulsive therapy, that is shock, is given, and during that time convulsions can occur, and you can see the movement, the rapid movement of the limbs, and the patient can injure himself during such convulsions and movements. And to cut off these, or to decrease the tone of the muscles during electroconvulsive therapy, you can use a skeletal muscle relaxant like succinylcholine or mivacurium. It's the short-acting ones you're using. In the case of severe cases of tetanus and status epilepticus, again, you would remember how a patient of tetanus would be. He has got spastic contraction of the muscles, and you have already learned how the tetanus patient is described. His back is arched and his muscles are contracted. To cut off those contractions, you can give a skeletal muscle relaxant in these conditions also. So again, once again, I'll revise it for you, the uses, that is as an adjuvant general anesthetic in the case of surgery, assisted ventilation in ICU, convulsions and trauma from electroconvulsive therapy, severe cases of tetanus and status epilepticus. So I have already told you the reasons why the skeletal muscle relaxants are given for these conditions. Now, with that, we finish the neuromuscular blockers. Now we go to the next one, that is the directly acting muscle relaxants. These are a type of peripherally acting skeletal muscle relaxants, and they are directly acting on the skeletal muscle fibers. So first one is dantrolene sodium, and it is acting on the ryanodine receptor calcium channels. RYR1. This is the same channels which I had referred to you in the case of malignant hypothermia. So it is acting on the ryanodine receptor calcium channels which are present in the sarcoplasmic reticulum of the skeletal muscles, and these drugs, they prevent the calcium release through these channels. So normally these channels will allow the calcium influx. Now dantrolene sodium will prevent the calcium release through these channels. As a result, the intracellular release of calcium, which is required for the excitation contraction coupling, is not occurring, and hence the muscle relaxation. So all of you are knowing the basics of muscle contraction, how the actin myosin interact, and how calcium is helping in the contraction of the muscles. All of you have learned this in your first year classes. It is physiology, Very elaborately you have learned that. So if you don't have calcium, the muscle contraction will not occur. So this drug is actually preventing the release of calcium into the muscle, and because that there is a lack of calcium, the excitation contraction coupling does not occur and there is no muscle contraction, so the muscle will relax. Now this drug can be given orally because it has got a good oral absorption. It can penetrate brain and hence it can cause sedation. It is metabolized in liver and excreted by the kidney. It is acting, its T half is almost 8 to 12 hours, and you can see orally. It can be given both orally as well as IV. So for orally, it is given for spastic neurological disorders like the upper motor neuron disorders, hemiplegia, paraplegia, multiple sclerosis. These are all associated with high tone of the muscle, where the muscle is highly contracted. So you have to give a directly acting skeletal muscle relaxant to cut the tone of the muscles in these conditions. Then it can also be given for malignant hyperthermia. I already mentioned to you what is malignant hyperthermia. It was occurring because of an abnormal ryanodin receptor channels, through which a lot of calcium is going in. Now these drugs will be blocking those receptor and prevents the calcium release. So these can be used as a treatment for malignant hyperthermia, and it is given IV. By IV route, it is given in case of malignant hyperthermia. Okay, so this is the 1 gram 8 hourly you can give in case of malignant hyperthermia. And once the condition improves, you can change over to oral administration. So the adverse effects with this drug are muscular weakness, then sedation because it is crossing the blood-brain barrier, and lightheadedness. Diarrhea is a notorious adverse effect associated with oral dantrolene sodium, and it can lead to hepatotoxicity on chronic use. So this is about the dantrolene sodium. So we have discussed so far about the neuromuscular blockers, about the directly acting muscle relaxants, and finally we come to the next part of the skeletal muscle relaxants, that is centrally acting skeletal muscle relaxants. So initially I told you they are acting through the cerebrospinal axis. So what are they doing? They are reducing the tone of the skeletal muscle by acting through the cerebrospinal axis without altering consciousness. So they are not altering the consciousness, they are acting through the cerebrospinal axis and they will decrease the muscle tone. They will selectively depress the spinal and the supraspinal polysynaptic reflexes involved in the regulation of muscle tone. So the reflexes which are involved in the regulation of muscle tone are the polysynaptic reflexes, which are both spinal and supraspinal. So they will selectively depress only the spinal and the supraspinal polysynaptic reflexes involved in the regulation of the muscle tone. So they are not altering the consciousness in the patient. Now we will just see what's the basic differences between the centrally acting and the peripherally acting muscle relaxants. So centrally acting, they decrease the muscle tone without decreasing the voluntary power, whereas the peripherally acting ones, they are causing muscle paralysis and the voluntary movements will be lost. So this is very, because the completely muscle is paralyzed, so the movements will be lost. Here the tone is decreased but the power of the muscle will be still there, means the muscle will not be in that tensed contracted state, but the power of the muscle will be retained. This centrally acting selectively inhibits the polysynaptic reflexes in the CNS. Peripherally acting ones, they block the neuromuscular transmission. So there is a basic difference in the mechanism of action, which I think you would have understood by now. Centrally acting, they can cause some CNS depression. Though we said that they are not affecting the consciousness, they can sometimes cause some CNS depression, whereas the peripherally acting ones are devoid of any kind of CNS depression. Centrally acting ones are given orally most of the times. Sometimes they can be given parenterally, but most of the times they are given orally. Whereas peripherally acting ones, as I told you, they are given IV most of the times. Centrally acting ones, they are mainly used for chronic spastic conditions, like you have a torticollis or a lumbago. For that chronic spastic conditions, you can use this centrally acting one. Whereas the peripherally acting ones are mainly used for short-term purposes, like surgical operations, for acute muscle spasms, for the ventilator support, tetanus, convulsions. For all these short purposes only, these peripherally acting ones are used, whereas the other ones are used mainly for longer acting spastic conditions. Now we'll see the classification of centrally acting muscle relaxants. So you should remember the classification as well as you should remember some of the examples. So we have got mefenicin congeners, mefenicin, carisoprodol, chlorzoxazone, methocarbamol. Then you have got benzodiazepines like diazepam, GABA-mimetic drug like baclofen, and central alpha-2 agonist like tizanidine. So the mefenicin congeners, they're usually present as a combination with analgesics, either for topical application as well as for oral application. So you can see in many of the drug oral formulations as well as the ointments that you apply for your spasms, muscle spasms, you might find one of these mefenicin congeners like mefenicin or carisoprodol. You even find chlorzoxazone very frequently in your oral tablets, which is often combined with the analgesic drugs. So we'll mainly look into the diazepam, baclofen, and tizanidine here. So diazepam is a benzodiazepine, and you will be learning in detail about the benzodiazepine in your later chapters when you're dealing with the CNS. So at this point, we can just remember that diazepam facilitates the GABA-mediated presynaptic inhibition. It is facilitating the GABA-mediated presynaptic inhibition, and it is one of it. It has got lots of actions. One of the actions is only skeletal muscle relaxation. There are a lot of other actions like sedative, anti-anxiety, and all of which you will be learning in your further chapters. And this, as a skeletal muscle relaxant, this drug diazepam is very well tolerated. It is valuable in spinal injuries and tetanus, and it is often combined again with analgesics, and it is used for these rheumatic disorders associated with muscle spasm. So usually the dose is 5 milligram. Usually it is given 3 times daily orally. In tetanus, you can give 10 to 40 milligram IV. So in the tetanus, you can see that both peripherally acting skeletal muscle relaxants as well as centrally acting skeletal muscle relaxants like diazepam can be used. So tetanus is a unique case where both these types of skeletal muscle relaxants can be used. Then you have got baclofen. It's a GABA analog and it acts on the GABA B receptor. And again, as I told you, it interferes with the release of excitatory transmitters. Excitatory transmitters. And it is used for the spastic neurological conditions like multiple sclerosis, spinal injuries, and it is often used for this hiccup also, for stopping the hiccup. Tizanidine is a clonidine congener. It is a centrally acting alpha-2 adrenergic agonist. So always remember, it is a centrally acting alpha-2 adrenergic agonist. Again, it is used for spastic neurological disorders. So both these baclofen and tizanidine, they are used for spastic neurological disorders. Baclofen is often used for hiccup also, intractable hiccups, the hiccups which are not reducing with the use of other measures. You can try a shot of baclofen in such patients. Now, finally, we come to the uses of centrally acting muscle relaxants. They can be used for acute muscle spasms like sprain or some dislocation, the bursitis, rheumatic disorders and all. Can be used for torticollis, lumbago, backache, neuralgias. Or it can also be used for increased tone of muscles associated with anxiety and tension states. Here you can give diazepam. Diazepam can be act in these cases. The diazepam acts both as a skeletal muscle relaxant as well as an anti-anxiety agent also. So it can be used for these states also. Then spastic neurological diseases like hemiplegia, multiple sclerosis, which I already mentioned to you. Then tetanus, diazepam can be used IV. Then even for ECT, where we mentioned under the peripherally acting one, even this diazepam can be used for ECT also. So tetanus, ECT, you can see that there is a use of both peripherally acting skeletal muscle relaxant as well as a centrally acting skeletal muscle relaxant. Then you have got orthopedic manipulations. Again, these can be done under the influence of IV diazepam. So these are the important areas that have been covered so far in part 1 and part 2. So you should know how to classify the skeletal muscle relaxants. You should be preparing a short note on neuromuscular blockers, where you will be discussing both about the non-depolarizing blockers as well as the depolarizing blockers. Then you can separately prepare the non-depolarizing blocker as a short note and depolarizing blocker, succinylcholine as a short note. Should also be aware of what is succinylcholine apnea and how to treat the succinylcholine apnea. Then you should know the examples of centrally acting muscle relaxants, and there should be special emphasis on diazepam. It is one of the drugs that is used very rampantly, not only for skeletal muscle relaxation, but also as an anti-anxiety drug and as a sedative hypnotic drug also. Then you should also prepare a short note on dandrolin sodium, and it is also good to know about malignant hyperthermia, about which you will be discussing in detail in your future topics. So with that, we come to the end of the skeletal muscle relaxants. If there are any doubts, we can clarify during the interactive session. Thank you.